Hey, it's Tim and Lisa, and you're listening to the REI Concierge Podcast. The REI Concierge helps Americans living abroad find and buy great investment properties in the U.S. From analyzing markets to finding local partners to closing your first deal, we're partnered with you every step of the way. Let's jump into today's episode. Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the REI Concierge Podcast with Tim and Lisa. Today, we have a guest. Scott Sweitzer is with us, and we were really looking forward to talking to Scott. Scott is the owner of Prime Settlement and Prime Estate Planning in Washington, D.C. He also identifies himself as a rookie real estate investor. Welcome,
Yes,
Scott.
Hi, Lisa. Hi, Tim. It's a pleasure to be here on this Wednesday morning, and I'm excited to be connecting with you, kind of explaining what I do, and also hopefully building some relationships with some of your contact lists wherever they may live.
Awesome.
We have contacts for you. We have so many questions. I am looking forward to jumping in.
Yeah. So Scott, I've known you for the better part of a decade, and you and I used to be part. Are you still in BNI in DuPont?
I am. Yep. Our chapter
Okay.
is going, and I'm still part of it. Yep.
Awesome. So yeah, Scott and I met at a BNI. For those of you that aren't familiar, Business Networking International. It's just kind of like a business incubator where you pass referrals and just kind of build your different revenue streams through partnerships with people in various industries. So Scott and I met probably a decade ago, and he was just a young fledgling, starry-eyed title attorney starting off on his new thing. And it's just really cool 10 years later to see him own multiple businesses. And even cooler to hear him getting into real estate investing. Because I was talking to Scott when I first got into real estate investing like 7 years ago. And I was like, Scott, how do I do this? How do I do this? And, can I do this? And stuff like that. So it's just really cool to see you kind of get into that too. And we, like Lisa said, we have a ton of questions. Scott also helped me with my recent refinance that I did on my Baltimore property that we talked about on I guess, a previous episode. He helped me unincorporate my LLC and retitle the company into my own name, which I thought was undoable for less than $30,000. Scott did it for significantly less than that. So I'm super appreciative for that. And he made that property much more valuable to my portfolio, plain and simply. So title is a big part of what we do in real estate investing. So yeah, it's good to see you, Scott. And let's jump in. Why don't you start with a little bit? We talked a little bit about what you do, but let's talk about your various branches of business, how those formed, how they progressed since we first met, and then, where you see it going from here. And then we have a lot of specific questions.
Okay, that sounds good to me. Well, I graduated from law school at Georgetown Law over 10 years ago now, and immediately started working at a title company in DC, and was a staff attorney there for 3 years, and then ended up deciding I wanted to build up my own agency. And I work with First American, who is our underwriter. So that's part of being a title agent, is you basically you sell basically an insurance policy that protects people's property rights, owners, and also lenders if they're issuing a loan. And you have an underwriter. You have like First American is our underwriter, for example. And there's a few big underwriters that work in this space. So I did that and I'm continuing to work in that business now for about 6 to 7 years. And about 3 years ago, I had a death of my grandparents. Actually, it's 4 years ago now. On one side of the family. And there was a kind of a stark difference between the way that their estate, their assets, the family managed things on their side and these other people in my family. And that and a few other things really inspired me to get into the estate planning space as well. I saw a real potential for serving my title clients in an estate planning capacity as well. And doing that then was great. So I also incorporated started a law firm, Prime Estate Planning, and the attorney in that firm, and I have a staff there, and I work with a coach, and we're part of what's called the New Law Business Model, and I can get into that more if you'd like me to. And then more recently, I just have seen so many good real estate investors go through both my title business and through the estate planning. I'm giving them advice in a variety of ways that it hit me. I'm like, wait a second, I can start doing this myself. I have capital now. I've got a good network. And, I started reading a lot of blogs, watching webinars and listening to podcasts, things like Bigger Pockets, for example. I've been consuming their content. And I realized that my experience in my network and my businesses allow me to I don't know, almost jump over some of the rookie steps in a certain sense.
For
I have
sure.
access to people with money, potential private wealth, people who have done this before, mentors or otherwise. And I also have valuable skills that I can exchange, in return for theirs. So it's one of those things where I'm almost like, I should have started this, 10 years ago,
Yeah,
but better late than never, right?
Absolutely. Can you close on your own properties, or do you have to hire a different closing agent?
So I can close it. So prime settlement, my business, I can use that to close. We'd have to have a different settlement agent. He can be contracted by us, but he have to have his own independent settlement license to actually handle the settlement and act as a third-party agent when he gets paper and so forth. So there's no conflict.
Yeah. So Scott, I think so. We kind of prepped you, and we want to hear feedback from our audience here. But we have several gurus that are repeat offenders on this podcast. We have Gabe that comes in and talks lending, and Lorenzo, the flipper friend, and we're kind of trying out Scott here as being our title guru. So I think what we're gonna do, I'm honestly more, and Lisa, I don't want to steal the show here, but I want to hear, I'm very interested in hearing about, just because I know you, and I'm very interested in hearing about how you went from title attorney that had really no interest from what I could gauge in real estate investing to seeing these successful people go through your business and saying, yeah, I can totally do that. And how that's progressed, because you and I spoke about a deal you did last year that I find super interesting and would love to get into the details on. But what I'm trying to say is, let's get into that piece of it more now to get started. And then rather than the, how does title work and stuff like that, we can do that too. We'll have you back is what I'm trying to say. But I want to hear that, because I think that's more fun than just, you get title insurance and you do this, you know what I mean? Like, we can do that, but you do that all day. And
title can be a little technical. Marketing for title too and talking about it can be a little like you're speaking into a room of other professionals. So I'm happy to go into sort of the story and how it ties into real estate investing as well. So I think, as I mentioned, I had this title company, had, of course, a lot of real estate investors as clients, purchased my own primary residence, built up the estate planning, and quickly realized that one of my niches here would be the real estate investor, because they have special needs in the estate planning space that other clients don't tend to have. In the States, probate court is the natural place. It's the court that has jurisdiction over your assets when you die. So if you have, whether or not you have a will, your estate goes through probate, and that is that process is often unpleasant for a lot of people. It's expensive for the family. It takes a lot of money out of the estate, litigation costs, bond costs, court costs. It's public, so anyone can go down and can see who's getting your assets and what's going on in the court proceedings, so it invites conflict. And it's lengthy. The court system takes anywhere from 6 to 12 months in good times. And during the pandemic, it's only been taking longer than that. So a lot of my clients like to avoid probate. And for real estate investors, probate can actually even be more difficult for the family, because if you own real estate, if you own properties in different jurisdictions, and I don't mean different countries, I mean the District of Columbia, Maryland, and Virginia, which is quite common, what has to happen is whatever your jurisdiction of residence is, that's where the main probate will be held. And then you'll have to hire an attorney to open up foreign probates, even though they're just different states, for your properties that are in different states. So if you own properties across the US, you're going to have all of these foreign estate matters going on basically at the same time. So it's going to draw out how long it's going to take in probate, and it's going to be dramatically more expensive. And a lot of real estate investors, I feel like, of course, you're looking at the upside, right? You're looking at the upside. You're not thinking about, hey, what happens when I die? What's going to happen to my family necessarily, So there's a lot of education that goes on there. So that was a fun niche for me, and I was really excited to be able to help those people. And the more of them that I work with, I came across my current realtor that I'm working with right now on today's deal. I just went under contract, actually, on a new property. Her name's
Congratulations.
Yeah, thank you. Her name's Amanda. And she really kind of turned me on to how to make money, how to make good investments in expensive markets, while also contributing to the affordable housing crisis in the area. And that's using Section 8. It's a federal program in the U.S. and it's basically states are then working with the U.S. to provide funding for lower income people. And I won't go into too many details about that program, but just to say that it is one of the ways to make your deals cash flow in expensive markets like DC, New York, San Francisco, and so forth. But from what I've heard from other people, DC is fairly unique insofar as that the type of the compensation you get, the rent the district will pay for you, is not just based on the unit type, whether it's a studio, 1 bedroom, 2 bedroom, etc. That's part of it, but it also has to do with which neighborhood you are buying the property. So, and the neighborhoods are not tied directly to market prices, as far as I can tell, but they're sort of tied to where the DC department thinks its lower income people would benefit from living by. So in DC, we have a lot of places in upper Northwest that are, pretty much free of crime. They're very leafy. They're great places to be. But for a variety of reasons, getting a 1-bedroom condo there might be a lot less expensive than getting a 1-bedroom condo in Logan Circle or in Georgetown, just because the areas aren't as sexy, because the market, people that are looking to come in, the young professionals or otherwise who would live in those condos, they'll pay more to be near the clubs, the shopping, the trendy areas. Going up to Glover Park, for example, which is, has great access to things, has great schools, is very safe. That's a top tier area for DC Section 8 programs. So you get paid top rents for that. But you can look at find some sweet spots. There are some value properties from a price perspective there. So you can actually make the cash flow work in a way that you really couldn't if you were just competing with other people in DC.
There's a lot so I say unpack a lot, and Lisa's supposed to keep me from saying unpack because I hate when people say, let's unpack all that, but there's a lot. And I know Lisa has some questions. Lisa, so yeah, the Glover Park one, you had a deal there last year, and I want to hear, there's a lot I want to hear. Lisa, you go first. I'm sorry.
I just want to jump back to what you were talking about with the probate courts and all of that and ask you, the moral of that story is have a will, right? Is that the simple moral of that story? Because I just want to make sure I know clearly what I need to do to avoid all that.
I think that's a good question. And that's actually, that's a common belief. Certainly you want to have a will, because the will is the simple foundational document that allows you to choose who gets your assets after you pass away. Otherwise, the court gets to choose who gets your assets. And that's based on a law that's different depending on what state you're in. So absolutely, you want to have a will. You want to be in control of your assets. But here's the point that I think I should make. If you just use a will, those assets will still go through probate court, and a judge will interpret the will and will go through the process of dispersing or distributing those assets. So a will does not keep you out of probate court. And what the document and the process that will is what's called a revocable living trust. So a revocable living trust is the master document. It's your get out of probate trust. And it's what I recommend as a foundational estate planning tool for anybody, especially real estate investors, but people who want to make sure their family can stay out of the probate process as much as possible.
Sign me up. I'm your next client.
There you go.
I'd be happy to go into more details about, revocable trust versus irrevocable trust. People have questions about estate taxes. They have real estate investors who have a lot of high net worth. They talk about asset protection, credit protection. Those are also more advanced topics that I get into with my clients. But I think the first thing to focus on for real estate investors is you have properties located in different places. You want to transfer title into that revocable living trust. And there's basically 2 ways you can do that. You can deed your property into the trust. It would be a zero consideration deed. And so you would be, I believe, at least in DC, Maryland, and Virginia, it's exempt for any kind of transfer taxes. I think that's probably true for the most part across the US. So it's very low cost, but it does take that work. If you have a dozen properties, that's a dozen properties that you would be deeding. On the other hand, if you're a more mature or seasoned real estate investor and you're holding your properties now in LLCs or maybe even corporations because you have larger multifamily or because you have multiple investors with syndications and so forth, it's a lot easier to fund the LLCs into your revocable living trust, because all you have to do is execute a simple document to assign your membership interest in the LLC to the trust, and boom, it's a private document, it's done. As long as there's no issues with the other investors, you don't have to worry about all the deeds, and it actually makes it easier.
And is there one trust that you can have, that you can put, if you have LLCs in different places and you have properties in different places, they can all be under one trust umbrella.
Exactly. Because the Revocable Living Trust, basically, you're creating this during your lifetime, and you're serving three roles. You're the grantor because you're putting the assets in it. You're also the beneficiary because during your lifetime, you're benefiting from all the assets. It's not for the benefit of anyone else. You're also the trustee, so you have full control during your lifetime as well. So you basically, you deed the properties into the trust, and you would then control them as the trustee. But basically, your control wouldn't change. It wouldn't change anything. Or if the properties are currently held by an LLC, you assign the membership interest. Let's assume, for example, you're the sole member or the managing member. You basically assign that membership interest to yourself in your capacity as trustee. So a little complicated from your perspective, but it actually is not that tough in practice to do.
Tim, why have you not introduced me to Scott before now?
I've tried. We tried to get him on the podcast like 6 months ago, and we're just very busy. And I told you about Scott for years now, Lisa. He's a guru.
Yes.
Yeah. So, and this is the problem, because we have all these specific title questions, and this is why we just have to have you back, Scott, because we want to know all this stuff. And honestly, no one understands how title works. I'm pretty sure you do, but like Lisa and I certainly don't, which is why we just trust you guys. So yeah, I think that we might have to have like a Q&A session with them, with like, listeners that write in questions.
That'd be great, actually. That'd be great.
And I know Scott does all kinds. He's on the social media now, and he does, I get your emails like Scott's thoughts of the day and stuff like that, where it's just kind of like little tidbits of how you can do the estate planning and title piece, which I think is super helpful. So we'll put all your contact info in our show notes for sure, so people can reach out directly. So let's keep going down I want to know more about the Section 8. So I just finished a book called Evicted by Matthew Desmond. I don't know if you've read it, but it won the Pulitzer Prize a few years back. It should be required reading for anyone that invests in real estate, because it's just kind of the tragic story of the circle of poverty. It's actually based in Milwaukee, just 6 different families that kind of get the process of eviction and how it ruins lives, and how, you get evicted, then you can't get another place, and you get evicted and stuff like that. And I say all this, phenomenal book. You should absolutely read it if you own any properties, just to keep these things in mind. But Section 8 is an attempt to alleviate that. Right. It's to get people out of these more crime-ridden neighborhoods, the neighborhoods where they just feel like they're trapped and they can't get out of the vicious cycle of eviction. And, I broke this, but my landlord won't fix it, and my landlord won't fix it because they think I broke it. And it's just like this vicious circle of he said, she said. And Section 8 gets people out of these neighborhoods and into neighborhoods that are more desirable for anyone, any walk of life. Glover Park, for instance, beautiful place, one of my favorite neighborhoods in DC. When I was renting my place on New Hampshire Avenue in Brightwood, Petworth, the Section 8, I had dozens of Section 8 recipients reach out to me asking, because it's very rare to find a 3-bedroom, 2-bath in that neighborhood for a family of 4 or 5. And they pay great rates. They pay market rates for these neighborhoods. And I think that, I don't know if that's unique in DC, and I don't know if you know that, but I think the program gets a negative connotation because it's, government assistance, and it's, a certain type of tenants, quote unquote, that, can't pay for it themselves, which is not at all the case. This is a program that is trying to eradicate poverty in certain areas of the district and just kind of spread the wealth, get people into more desirable, safe areas for families to be raised. And I think it's a wonderful program. And I think if we as real estate investors can utilize that program and get people into these safe neighborhoods and still make it a profitable business, because that is the point of real estate investing, that's an all-around win. And you successfully did that last year. And I honestly didn't know it was possible in a place like Glover Park. So I want to hear, you told me a little bit about several months ago about how it works, but if you could just give us kind of the details about, first of all, how you came to that realization, how the process has gone, working with the DC government and, trying to get the voucher system set up, the extra inspections you have to go through, all the extra hoops you have to jump through to make sure this is a safe, habitable place, which is good, but it's harder for us as real estate investors. Just how that worked and how the numbers worked out, if you'd be so kind.
Sure, I'm happy to. Well, first I want to say I really owe the inspiration for this area, for me, to my realtor, Amanda Gant. She's also a real estate investor. She, I think, probably has about a dozen properties right now in the DMV area in DC, and is the reason why I got into the Section 8 program here. So you'll have to have another podcast where she comes on as a guest, because she can go into a lot more detail about everything than I can. But I see people when they talk about Section 8, I think you're right. They're intimidated by the inspection process, the bureaucracy, the red tape, the delays, sort of the unknown of working with this faceless government and so forth, and not being able to just do things quickly and efficiently and in their own way. And then they look at the quality, the perception of the quality of tenant and so forth, and they're concerned they're going to get people that aren't going to take care of the property or otherwise are going to have bad traits and everything. And then they say, okay, the trade-off to that is stability. You're going to have the government paying your rent on a regular basis. They're not going to be late. And perhaps the fact that once you get a Section 8 tenant, they're more likely to be there for a longer period of time. So you have less turnover, less vacancy. Mm-hmm. Both of those are totally true. But the beauty of being able to work with someone like Amanda and who runs spreadsheets, who runs the numbers to see where the return on investment is going to be higher depending on how DC pays and the number of units and the neighborhoods and so forth, is she's able to find types of opportunities where you're getting substantially above market. So my condo in Glover Park, I would say the market rent for that, it's a 1-bedroom, probably is around $1,700 or $1,800 a month. DC pays me about $2,650 per month. So that includes
wild.
Because again, I'm not sure exactly why, but their analysis.
No, I'm sorry, I said wild. That's wild.
Yeah,
wild. That's fantastic.
And that sort of ratio is totally it's not that difficult to get in certain kind of properties in the Midwest, for example. Ohio, Wisconsin, and so forth. You can get properties that cash flow positively from day one without much effort. But that's tough to get in the East Coast. And the thing you have with the East Coast, which is nice, is you get this built-in, in most places, you get this built-in assumption or likelihood, I would say, of appreciation. That's why people invest on the East Coast, because they've seen a history of appreciation, and they know that they're going to gain equity in their property. Whereas a lot of Midwestern markets, certainly not all of them, but some of them have declining property values.
Yeah, I love that. When you were telling me those numbers, I just couldn't believe it, that you can get $2,600 and the market rent is $1,700. And I think that just, kudos. I think we need to do an episode just about Section 8 and the voucher program nationwide, just in general, Lisa, because there are so many stigmas attached to it. And I think 98% of them are simply incorrect. There are certain things that you have to do, because I think the mission behind it is to, like I said, provide safe, quality housing and safe neighborhoods for families. And so they have to check up on that. There are extra inspections you have to do. There are annual inspections. I know a couple of properties I have in DC had video inspections during COVID, where my tenants were nice enough to walk around and do video for the inspector, and he gave it an okay. Or if there was something that needed fixing, we fixed it. But I think it's overlooked. There's an investor, I believe his name's Joe Asamoah, and Scott, you might know this. He's an investor in DC too, and he does this to the nth degree, where he has mastered the niche in DC of finding like 3 to 4 bedroom houses and turning them into 5-bedroom houses, because one of the qualifications of Section 8 is you're paid based on neighborhood, number one, number two, based on number of beds and baths. So like if he can get a 4-bedroom house in a quality neighborhood in Petworth or Columbia Heights or something like that, make it a 5-bedroom, DC will pay something like $4,500 a month or something ridiculous like that. And a family of 6 from Anacostia that is just looking for a safe place to live can move to Columbia Heights and have the DC government pay a market rent that works for everybody. And it just changes the cycle of poverty. And it works for people that are trying to run businesses. Like it's honestly something to be embraced. And if you can like deal with the bureaucracy and that red tape, like this can change the face of cities. I mean, it really can, at least in terms of housing. So yeah, kudos to you, kudos to Joe. I think that kind of stuff is fascinating, and I want to learn all about it. So thanks for sharing that with us.
And I think what Joe does also is he has a team in place with contractors. So he'll go in and he'll like dig out the basement and he'll find he'll create spaces there to put extra bedrooms in. So that's a whole nother. I'm sure you talked about this before. That's a whole nother part of the real estate investment process that I have yet to get into, which is the BRRRR method, where you're buying and you're rehabbing and you're renting it out at a stabilized rate that's higher, and then you're refinancing to get your equity out and then doing more of the same. So that would be up leveling my real estate investment game. And for me right now, the question is, with my 2 other businesses and the fact that I like to travel a lot into different countries.
You don't have time, Scott.
I have the time to, do I have time to do that sort of thing? And the answer is no for right now.
Let me tell you, Scott, you don't have the time for that right now. I know your schedule, and you don't have the time for that. Maybe one day. Maybe once you sell one of these businesses off, you might have a little time to dig a basement. But yeah, I don't know. I just think that, and this isn't actually where we anticipated this podcast to go, as Lisa and I always go into these things very open-minded, but I think this is a crucial topic, and I think it's super interesting, and I hope I'm not the only one. Because yeah, Joe does this, Joe Asamoah again, does this because he treats his tenants like family. Like he will go over there on Christmas and bring presents to the kids, because these folks don't just move in there for 6 months and say, I need something else. They're there for 7, 8, 9, 10 years. This is home for them, and it's like, I don't know. That's a big part of what I'm focusing on this year is just, we get a bad name as our real estate investors a lot of the times, like we're slumlords. We just want the bottom dollar. How can we save the most money? And I get offended. I hate that, like I really do. And a big part of what I want to do in my real estate investing is provide safe, quality homes for my tenants. I don't look at them as clients, like I look at them as people. I am responsible for providing good housing for them. And if you can do that in a more sustainable way that really changes the faces of neighborhoods and changes families' lives, I mean, let's not even downplay it. Changes families' lives, if you can do this right and provide them great places, like that's it, and if we can stay in business doing that, like I think that's so important. So I really wanted to dig down on that. And I appreciate that story because yeah, that's everything. That's everything to me.
And I think that's the right mindset to have if you're going to be investing in this niche. The gentleman who is my tenant that came in last year, he's someone who's to some extent, I would say developmentally disabled, and he was getting harassed by teenagers in the neighborhood that he was in. So he just wanted a place that was safe, where he wasn't going to, face those sort of obstacles. He was walking around the neighborhood and so forth, and he could just, feel like he was taken care of. So, getting the place in a better condition, renovating it, and putting it under good management was really something that felt good and continues to feel good. And I think you can look at it from that perspective too.
I love it. Awesome. And Scott, let's get analytical for a second, just because the number nerds that are listening are getting bored out of their minds. But tell us the numbers. What did you do? What did you put into this place? What did you have to fix? In terms of the Section 8, what's your cash flow end up looking like? Just give us the Amanda spreadsheet numbers.
I don't have it in front of me, but to the best of my memory, I believe it was, so the listing price, I believe, was $265, and this is for a 1-bedroom condo. I think we got it $10,000 under list, so $255 plus a 3% seller subsidy. So that in the DC market, especially last year, when everything was going way above asking price, that was a lot of my friends were like, "What? How did you do that?"
Yeah.
What it was is that studios and one-bedroom condos during the pandemic, especially in sleepier areas where there's a lot of supply, like Lower Park, were just not what people wanted to be. People wanted to be in bigger houses. They wanted to be, they wanted to move a little bit away from those kind of areas. So it was just an area where the market was sort of weak, but there was still this opportunity and so forth. So those are the initial numbers. I got a conventional loan with 20% financing. You can kind of do the math right there. There was, of course, closing costs and things like that. Use my title company, so some of those closing costs were a little bit less than they might otherwise.
Nice. Bonus.
We probably put about $4,000 worth of rehab costs, so not a lot. Part of the rehab costs had to do with installing smoke and fire detectors and so forth in a way that was compliant with the regulations. We had to have inspections and so forth. Mm-hmm. It took probably the biggest thing for me were the holding costs. I closed in May and didn't have a tenant occupy until September. And that was really my fault, and that was my learning period of how to make sure that my handyman knew what to do and make sure that I was passing these inspections and so forth. So, the holding costs are more there. Certainly, my goal this time around is to lease up and pass the inspection within 2 months, which keeps those costs to a minimum. The nice thing is that the DC once the tenant is actually in place, DC and the charity that they're working through. Will send you the rent back prorated to the date that the tenant came in there. In my case, I think the way it works is that DC, and again, it's DC through a variety of charities. So it's a little bit different depending on which charity you're working with, which nonprofit you're working with. They pay for the lion's share of the rent, and it comes in on the 15th of the month like clockwork. And then the tenant has to pay, I believe it is 30% of their income, of their monthly income, to make up the difference. And if they can show their income is less than that, then DC will kick in that amount. So that typically comes in towards the end of the month. But that, again, it comes by the end of the month, but it's never been missed. Either DC or the tenant kicks in, and the tenant has a really big incentive to keep making these payments because if they lose their voucher status, lose the voucher, and lose their housing status, they'll have to wait again for a long period of time. So it's really important to them. So they're highly motivated to pay for everything.
Yeah, no, I think that's really interesting. I think we might need to do a deep dive on the Section 8, how it works, because like you said, like that's something I don't know enough about in terms of the waiting list and how to get on there and all that, because there's a lot. I mean, it's a bureaucracy and there's a lot of hoops to jump through. But yeah, so that's super interesting. And then, like, what are your HOA fees on that, if you remember?
HOAs for that one are $450, so I'd say middle of the road. Okay. Some of these older buildings have HOA fees set in $700 to $800 a month because they have a lot of amenities, everything else, a lot of deferred maintenance perhaps. And you just have to be really cognizant of that when you're projecting your cash flow, forecast and so forth. And you have to make sure that if you're going to buy a property with that high of a HOA fee, that the purchase price is adjusted down, to account for that and everything. I found some of those, but I think there is a sense that, especially there's just a little bit of inflexibility that, let's say the HOA fee is $1,000, you'd need, for this to work, you need the purchase price to be well below $200,000. It seems like people are reluctant to sell condos for less than $200,000. There's like a mental barrier there. And perhaps if you're buying it for your primary residence, you're going to live there, you don't care as much, and so you're willing to pay more. So I think there's a little bit of some stickiness there in the market is what I would say.
And are you managing yourself currently?
I'm not actually. Most people would. I think in my situation, living in DC and only having one property and now two and everything, you'd think why would you bother outsourcing that? But again, the whole idea of wanting to scale it, having the two other businesses, living remotely from different places all the time, not having any handyman contractor skills, with no particular interest in in gathering them, I decided to start out with property management right away. We'll see how it goes. So far, so good. And Tim, you'll like this too. It's actually with Scott Bloom, who is a fellow B&I member in our chapter and owner of Columbia Property Management, and he focuses on properties just in Northwest DC. So it's very location specific, and so far it's worked really well. And he's comfortable working with the Section 8 program. I know some property managers are not, but he's comfortable with that.
Fantastic. So basically, we've gone. I appreciate you sharing all that, Scott. Basically, what I'm trying to get at is Scott Sweitzer found a 1% property in one of the nicest neighborhoods in Washington, D.C. But Lisa, you can only invest in cash flowing or appreciating markets. You can't have both. Or you can actually find a 1% property in Glover Park. So that is incredible. Like this is why I wanted to deep dive here, because these are the kinds of numbers you look for in Birmingham and Chattanooga and Kansas City, where you buy a $100,000 property, you get $1,000 in rent. You bought a condo in Northwest DC for $260,000 or less, and you get $2,600 in rent. Yeah. HOA fees aside, property management aside, that's incredible. So kudos to you, and kudos to Section 8. Honestly, like I'm really excited by this, and I want to learn more. Lisa, I've talked this whole time. I want to hear what you have to think about all this.
So this has been fascinating, Scott, and I really appreciate you sharing it. And I feel a little bad directing it back towards the boring topic of closing and title.
Okay. Lisa has questions.
However, I am really interested in, I've used title companies for every single property I've closed on.
Yeah.
And there's a part of me that's like, I have no idea what they're doing. I just trust them. And I think it'd be very interesting to hear from you. I mean, where did this even start? Why do we have title companies? What do you do in the big picture, and then kind of work down to the details for us a little bit? Because we all use your services. And I don't think I'm alone in just kind of being like, I don't really know what they do. I just know I have to use them.
Okay, I'm happy to. Now I'll try to keep it as just kind of as in layman's terms and so forth, not get bogged down. But I think basically there's two basic functions that at least my title company fulfills, and that is acting as escrow agent, meaning that we handle the funds in the real estate transaction. So if you're buying a property, your cash to close funds and the lender funds come into our trust accounts, our escrow accounts, are held there, and then they're dispersed based on what's on either the Alta settlement statement or the HUD-1 statement. And we then disperse those money out to realtors, to other lenders, to sellers, to ourselves. And we have a fiduciary responsibility to represent the contract as a third-party neutral. We're not representing the buyer or the seller, regardless of where the business may be referred in. We're representing that contract and making sure that the money is handled appropriately. So that's the escrow part of it. And the second part is also in the US, the way that the legal system evolved with real property, the government does not guarantee that when a seller passes title on to a buyer, the government does not step in and guarantee that that title is valid. It either is or it isn't. And in the absence of title companies, in the absence of title insurance, the only way to deal with that would be through litigation. So you'd have to go through court, and there actually is a process called in court that's in place that you can actually go through to it's called a suit to quiet title. So that's a very expensive measure of last resort. So where the title industry has stepped in over the last 100 years or even more than that is having a product called title insurance that it issues to buyers and or lenders that it basically ensures their property rights, ensures that there wasn't any fraud in the background, ensures that the property that the seller purports to have is actually owned correctly and so forth. And you can then make a title claim. Still not a process that you really want to go through, but making a title claim is a lot easier and less expensive than going through the litigation you otherwise would have to go through. So in a nutshell, that's the function. And we're both protecting the property rights, and we're also kind of acting as the gears in a real estate transaction. We're working behind the scenes.
That's a good analogy.
I think people don't, almost like the way a bank works, where, we may be working really hard in the background to make sure that wires are going out, and money's being sent out at the right times and so forth. And really, we're doing our job well for the most part when nothing goes wrong. It may be nice if you get your photo at settlement, or if they get some nice swag or otherwise, or if you have really great customer service. But we're doing our job well if there aren't any hitches, if the money comes out correctly, if there aren't any title issues that arise, because we of course do a full title examination. We work with abstractors to look at the land records, to look at the court records, and so forth, to see if there are any liens or judgments or issues that would cause title problems. Like in DC, for example, a big one would be potential tenant rights. DC is a very tenant-friendly jurisdiction.
TOPA, right?
Yeah, TOPA. So that's a statute, that's a law called Tenants' Opportunity to Purchase Act, where tenants, for the most part, have the opportunity when the owner of the property is selling it. A tenant has an opportunity to basically match that offer and buy the property themselves. Whether or not you like that statute and whether or not you think that it's currently being used in a way that it was intended for, it causes big issues for sellers and for buyers, and that's one of the things that we have to examine on a regular basis.
So this is super helpful, and I really like how you described job is to represent the contract. It's kind of an interesting way to look at it, right? Because I've understood, okay, you're an objective third party holding funds, things like that, but that's a helpful way to describe your services, like you're representing the contract. The other interesting piece is about the title insurance. And on my closing disclosures, that is one of the fees that always has in parentheses optional after it. And I'm always tempted to be like, yeah, I don't really need that. But then I get it because I'm always worried about what if I don't have it. But why is that optional? And do people ever turn that down? And if they do, what's the risk?
Well, before we had TRID, before we had the closing disclosures, and we were back in the days of using the HUD-1 statement for residential purchases, there wasn't that optional listed by it. That was something that came out of the financial crisis, 2008, 2009. And it was, a consumer protection and a disclosure. It came out of a lot of lobbying. There was a lot of intense lobbying on whether or not to put that optional next to it. In a certain sense, you'll notice that the lender's title insurance isn't optional. If you want to use conventional funds, loan funds, lenders are going to require that you pay their title policy, so that you're basically taking their risk off the table, so that if a title defect comes up, you've already paid them basically, so they can make a title claim. It's optional to an owner because I guess the idea is that you can make an informed decision. You don't have to pay this title premium, And if a title issue comes up, you can go ahead and go to court and litigate it. That's your own personal choice. I think that there are certain situations where it's more likely that things are risky and less likely. So I certainly have seen people decline to purchase an owner's policy. But most investors that are seasoned, I just think they think of title insurance as a cost, just like getting like an HOI, like a homeowner's insurance, policy or a builder's risk. It's not just, they're not getting it just because their lender requires it to close on the deal, but because it's the kind of risk mitigation that makes for a good business. When you're building out a portfolio of properties, you want to avoid litigation as much as possible. Litigation is super expensive. It's almost like a catastrophic event for that particular property. So if you buy a title policy, that's indemnifying you against, or it's greatly reducing the risk that you're actually going to be in that position, that you have to be litigating past events.
That's very helpful.
Yeah.
And I will continue to pay that optional fee.
Because it's not, we're talking a couple $100 when you're talking about like potential stuff coming back to bite you for thousands and all the paperwork. And
to get into the details a little bit, I think that what you see on the CD and so forth, you may see the full owner's policy rate. Let's say it's $2,000, but if you elect not to get the owner's policy, the actual spread, the difference between the policy that would include both lenders and owners and the one that includes just lenders is actually a lot less than that. So you're actually not saving that much money, as it turns out, and you are paying to insure your lender against that litigation risk, but you're not insuring yourself against that risk. So that's the way that I like to sort of have people, think about it.
There's probably a bunch of different, very important questions that we could continue to ask, but one question that is really of interest to those of us who close on properties when we are not local to those properties, be it we are in the foreign service or other expat jobs and outside the country or just in another state. Why can we not do electronic signatures on closings yet, Scott? It's
Lisa,
2022.
That was going to be my selfish question.
I stole it from you, Tim.
No. I completely I feel your pain. I'm a member on the DC Land Title Association. So we actually, I volunteer to try to get DC up to speed with things. And that has been probably our number one agenda item, is trying to work with the other states to get electronic closings. And really the gold standard, it's called RON, a remote online notarization. It's making sure that notaries or agents have a software platform that's sophisticated enough that they can do notarization, because things have to be notarized. We can't change that law, but we can do it, and we can authenticate the notarial act, I should say, online. And then at that point, people should be able to sign documents from anywhere in the world, as long as that technology is being used. And not only will the documents be electronic and be valid, but they can be recorded in DC, Maryland, Virginia, whatever state, without ever having a paper copy, without ever having paper, so that the entire process would be authenticated and valid online, even going on record. And you wouldn't have really getting past the idea of having to have wedding signatures, paper records of these types of things. And some people speculate that that blockchain may have something to do with this as well. But so why can't we? The reasons are political. Right now, and I don't claim to be a total expert in this, there are certain states that are holdouts that don't want to adopt this. And the biggest one right now is California. And for California, it's a technology issue, because California has plenty of technological, capacity for that.
They have Silicon Valley. Come on, California.
There is, I can't name names, but there's this political jockeying going around for control within California. And remote online notarization just happens to be a victim of this. And until that goes away, I think that the bill is dead in the water. I think we're waiting in California and a few other small rural states to move forward.
You're crushing my optimism, Scott.
Silly.
Just, oh man.
But hey, the ALTA, the American Land Title Association, I'm a part of that as well. We are advocating for remote online notarization. So, check us out online and do what you can. If you're working with GCAR or other realtor associations, make your voice count. And
can we write to who do we write to make
you could Google American Land Title Association. There's TAN. I think it's the Title Action Network. I believe that's like their public advocacy, a place to go. So write to them.
Okay.
Awesome. All right. Well, since Scott, I don't know if you've gotten a chance to listen to our podcast, but Lisa stole my selfish question. I have a jingle and I usually sing Tim.
And now it's time for Tim's Selfish Questions.
My next selfish question is, when are you and I going to try a burr together in DC?
What are we going to do? What? I'm sorry.
A burr, Scott, a burr.
Oh,
you said you don't have time. I don't have time either, but we have knowledge. Let's try a burr.
I would. Okay. We can try a burr. I guess.
Okay. That was an easy, selfish question.
Yeah.
When? Scott says now. Okay. And we're done.
We can partner together with the capital and so forth, or we can get short-term debt and everything. And I definitely know a few good contractors and everything. I would just need a little help in terms of, managing the process and I don't know, feeling comfortable that, the price estimates and everything was being kept in line. And maybe with you being around, that'll make it easy. Be happy to.
Lisa's interested too. Lisa's got the bags with the dollar signs on them, and she just says, "Here, guys, go run for it." And we'll try it.
I think we need people that are committed to being on the ground while the construction phase is going on. I think that's the long and the short of it.
Okay.
I can work remotely from Washington, D.C.
You can.
For a couple months, manage a project.
Okay, yeah, that would be great.
Awesome. Scott, thanks so much. Lisa, do you have any other questions? We need to have Scott back. That's
yes.
it, right?
Scott, we would love to have you back because I want to talk to you about estate planning, and I'd love to have you back for a whole episode on estate planning because that just the little bit that you talked about, I want to know more, and I feel like this is incredibly important and so not understood by the vast majority of us out there.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. There's a lot of detail there, and there's a lot of anecdotes that I'd be happy to share. There's things about, in DC, for example, like there's implications for estate planning. There's implications for moving properties in and out of LLCs, to get back to Tim's point from the beginning of this today's session. Easy to do in Maryland and Virginia, very expensive to do in DC, so only do it for a really good reason, just as a matter of law. Owning your property in an LLC or a trust does have implications for rent control, so you've got to kind of add that to the mix of whether, of the pros and cons of doing that, estate planning versus, raising the rent. And you have to be very strategic. So I think there's a lot to talk about. Be happy to do it.
Yeah, for sure. We need to do that.
Scott, we will include links to your website and anything else, if you're okay for people to reach out and get in touch with you. We'll put all that in the show notes.
Absolutely, yeah. Websites and so forth, and we can talk offline. I can have Michaela, who's my great client service director, share our social handles and everything, and so there'll be plenty of information, and I really look forward to chatting with everybody.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for listening to today's episode of the REI Concierge Podcast. We think you should share this with all of your friends. This is such a valuable episode with lots of practical takeaways, and we will have Scott back so we can get more information on the estate planning. With that, until next time,
happy real estate adventures.